I'm Andrew Murata, host of the Education, Leadership, and Beyond podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dr. Anthony Reibel. He is the Director of Research and Evaluation at Adelaide Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois. He also is an author, and today we're talking about the book, Beyond PLC Lite, Evidence-Based Teaching and Learning in a Professional Learning Community at Work. This is such a cool conversation. You're going to learn so much. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast, and you might be asking yourself, hey, Steve, how could I do that? Well, glad you asked that question. Here's one way. You could tell a friend and share links. 2, you can go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, how about click on the link on my website homepage where it says, buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 or $5 or more to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. Thanks so much. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
And what it's kind of known on the street is PLC Lite. Oh, you're doing PLC Lite then, let's move beyond that, right? And that was kind of the problem we saw is how do we help these educators who continue to ask us when they come and see what we do, how did you get to this self-sustaining culture place?
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Anthony R. Reibel, EDD, is the Director of Research and Evaluation at Adelaide Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois. In 2006, he became a Spanish teacher at Stevenson, where he served as a curricular team leader, core team leader, coach, and club sponsor. In 2010, Anthony received recognition from the state of Illinois, and in 2011, Illinois Computing Educators named him Technology Educator of the Year. He currently sponsors 2 clubs, 1, Kiva, which gives microloans to entrepreneurs living in areas lacking financial institutions, and 2, Fire, which promotes equality and respect among Stevenson students and staff through conversation and advocacy in school and throughout the community. Anthony is the author and co-author of 7 books on education. Some titles include Embracing Relational Teaching, How Strong Relationships Promote Student Self-Regulation and Efficacy, Small Changes, Big Impact, 10 Strategies to Promote Student Efficacy and Lifelong Learning, Proficiency-Based Assessment, Process, Not Product, and Pathways to Proficiency, Implementing Evidence-Based Grading. Each of these explores the relationship among student efficacy, pedagogy, and learning. Anthony is also the publisher and chief editor of The Assessor, a publication that features short articles written by teachers and administrators to support conversation about formative assessment. Anthony completed his doctorate, which studied the effects of cognitive bias on teachers' evaluation of student performance at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Our focus will be the book Dr. Reibel wrote with Troy Gobble, Mark Onischek, and Eric Twaddell, Beyond PLC Lite, Evidence-Based Teaching and Learning in a Professional Learning Community at Work. Dr. Reibel, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Absolutely. Hello, listeners. Excited to be here. And Steve, thanks for this opportunity.
Well, so glad to have you on, Anthony, and this is really cool. Like the way the book looks, feels, and all the cool stuff that's inside it. And but before we get into that, let's talk about you for just a minute. You're the Director of Research and Evaluation at Adelaide Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois. Tell us about what you do and a little bit about your school.
Yeah, so Stevenson High School District is in northern Illinois. About 30 minutes north of Chicago-ish, some roughly around there, and in Lincolnshire, Illinois. And I've been here for 18 years, believe it or not. It's gone really fast. I was in the business world for about 4 years. I had a business Spanish degree coming out of Indiana University, and then went the business route for a while. And then dusted off the Spanish degree and ended up here. So I started as a Spanish teacher, then became director of assessment, where I led a lot of the work we're going to talk about in the book. Became assistant principal for a little while during COVID. And then our superintendent wanted me to keep going deeper into this agency-focused work, formative assessment work. So There was a new position open for director of research where it's more, if you think about it, it's more like doing data analytics for the school, or really figuring out, Steve, I guess the real purpose of my job is to figure out if what we're doing is actually having an impact, right? So I have a team of 3 who I lead now and do research, analytics, all that sort of stuff now. So it's been quite a journey here.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. And that's it's always kind of neat to know how people's journeys take place. So you kind of had some neat shifts there, but 18 years, kudos, man. That's awesome.
It's gone fast.
I understand. All right, so let's shift to your book, Beyond PLC Lite, Evidence-Based Teaching and Learning in a Professional Learning Community at Work. Can you share an overview? I mean, who's the target audience?
The target audience is really anybody in education, as far as teacher, admin, instructional lead, anybody who's really doing the work, so to speak, in education. Not necessarily for students or parents, that's not who I'm talking about, but anybody in admin and teaching it was designed for. And here's, if I can just jump right in, the problem that my co-authors and I saw, obviously for those listeners that don't know, Adlai E. Stevenson High School is regarded as the birthplace of the PLC movement. That was late 80s, early 90s. Rick DeFore was our principal superintendent, and yada, yada, yada. Professional learning communities are what they are now. So I walked into this culture and structure 18 years ago, and we were doing a lot of things really well. We had common assessments, we had team time, we had intervention structures, we had, mission and vision and values. We had all the parts and pieces of a professional learning community. And what we continue to see for, when we have site visits every month where people can come up and see what we do and talking to those educators, we continue to hear this comment, Steve, which is, we're doing it all right. We have all the parts and pieces of a PLC, but nothing's really changed. We feel like we've done some nice things and some things have changed, but we really feel like we're not unlocking the potential that we read about or heard about with this professional learning community thing. And what it's kind of known on the street is PLC Lite. Oh, you're doing PLC Lite then, let's move beyond that, right? And that was kind of the problem we saw is, how do we help these educators who continue to ask us when they come and see what we do, how did you get to this self-sustaining culture place? How do you get this PLC to keep moving on its own and, build this innovative culture? How are you getting the results that you're getting, from this work? Because we're not seeing that. And we've been a PLC for 10 years and we've done everything that we thought. So that's really the purpose of the book, is how do you, what actions are going to take you past that kind of stalled out place that a lot of schools get to in this work. So I know we're going to dive deeper into some of those actions here in a second, but that's kind of why we wrote the book.
Very cool. Thanks. All right. So you've written other books, and this book includes 3 other authors, Troy Gobble, Mark Onachek, and Eric Twaddell. Could you talk about working with this team and creating the work behind Beyond PLC Lite? And I'm pretty sure they're from your school also. I mean, how'd this all work together? I mean, what was this like? I mean, talk about that.
Oh, it's, as I said in my acknowledgments, I mean, me personally, it's been one of the greatest experiences of my life, collaboratively, professionally, creatively. They're just amazing individuals who, we all brought very different strengths, and it just sort of happened, right? Like, I do work with these gentlemen. They're on our admin team, superintendent, director of curriculum, principal. And we just started talking about grading one day. And our superintendent, Dr. Twaddell, has always wanted to change the grading, like move beyond point-based grading. That was his vision for many years. And I had been dabbling with some things as a teacher, and then I got hired as director of assessment. I said, hey, let's think about some things differently. And then, the other two brilliant gentlemen kind of came into those conversations. And, Steve, one thing, how these creative things happen, like people just get in the same room, you start talking, and then suddenly it's like, that could work. That makes sense. Right. But I think, I don't want this to come across that it was just us four in a room going, let's change grading and here's how you do it. My role was for 8 years to listen to our teachers. So we had a pilot team go try out some of these things, and I listened and coached, heard their trials and tribulations, their successes, their challenges. And then we brought on a couple more teams after that, and then more teams. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work that our educators did do in this. It was really our job to kind of listen and coach and react. But I think generally, for the most part, once we started headed down this road, Steve, like it was making sense to a lot of our early adopters. And then our early majority was like, yeah, I think we can do this. And then it was us four, my co-authors, kind of leading this over probably about 8 years. It took us to move all of our 221 curricular teams, to be extremely exact, to this beyond PLC Lite space and great new grading space.
Very cool. Yeah. So before we go deeper, because we're getting ready to, let's get into some definitions of these terms real quick. So could you share what a PLC is to you, what PLC at work refers to, and then you already did it a little bit, but what PLC Lite means?
Yeah, I think roughly, professional learning community is adults who are acting with humility, in collaboration with each other. Interdependently is the word that's out there in the PLC literature, to achieve results for kids, right? That's kind of the loose definition of a professional learning community. And I think the humility and interdependence are the key words in that definition, because you can have, as Rick DeForest said for years when I used to watch him speak, you can have a group and a team, right? And groups of people just kind of are going in the same direction, and they're just kind of walking the same path, but not necessarily working interdependently. And then, the word that I throw in there is humility. Like, we're not going to be able to help kids learn unless we are humble with each other as adults, right? It's not just my way versus your way, or I have an idea that works and you should take that idea because I feel it works best, right? None of that really exists in a professional learning community. And then the professional learning community at work means, how is it actually being implemented and lived? And that's through, the three big ideas: student learning, focus on results, and focus on collaboration. And, I think one thing I'll say up top here is why we wrote the book. Another reason why we wrote the book was a lot of schools will take those three big ideas and put them on the table and just leave them there separately. Meaning, we have data, put those things on the table. We have team time, focus on collaboration. We focus on kids learning. We have essential standards, put those on the table. But just putting it on the table doesn't create a self-sustaining culture that is a professional learning community, right? You can't just empty a puzzle box on the table and leave the pieces there and go, okay, we did it. No, you would put the puzzle together. And that is really why we wrote the book. We continue to see parts, segments, aspects of the professional learning community, literature and process on teams' tables, on schools' tables, but nothing is overlapping, being put together in ways that create a self-sustaining culture. Because that's the goal, Steve. Like, if you were to walk into my high school, it is a self-sustaining, innovative culture where people depend on each other to get kids to learn, period. And it does it on its own. Yeah, admin, we're doing stuff to lead it, and teachers are doing stuff to collaborate and keep kids learning. But ultimately, you walk into the school, you see a self-sustaining culture, which is to my shock, working with other schools, I was shocked at how many schools have PLC parts, but they don't have that self-sustaining aspect. So, yeah, that's what I'll say up top there. Yeah.
Thanks for explaining that. And I do know what you mean. You see the parts. It's kind of like there's commercial you see, because it's the parts, pieces, stuff like that. And, sorry, that's old fast food commercial, but but it's.
No, I'll interject this. No, you're right on. And this is not my quote. This is our math director's quote. He said to me one time, his name's Dershan Jain. He's our math director here. He said, Tony, the what's have become the why in education. Like, why are we let's change our grading system. Well, let's make our grade book aligned to standards. That's our why of making the grading change. No. Like, that's a what of making the grading change. The why you're making a grading change is so that kids can learn at high levels, or that you can create more agency in kids, create a self-sustaining learner. That's the why. Right. And I thought that was so key to our work years ago, and shaping this. A lot of schools end at the what's, like intervention. Well, let's put in an intervention period in the middle of the day. That's our why we're doing it. No, you're doing it so you can identify learning stories, which we're going to talk about later, in students, and support those learning stories in meaningful ways so those kids can become self-reliant people. So just to put that on there, is you can't just have the puzzle pieces. You can't just have the what's. The why has got to be also in there to help you pass the PLC Lite.
So important, and how you pointed out, understanding what the why really is, as opposed to confusing it with something that's not really the point. So it's just how you get there. I like that. So, all right. So one of the things that you talk about that's involved in this discussion is something that you refer to as the knowing-doing gap. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's, taking theory to practice. It's, the things in your head to be factual, to be worthwhile, to be reliable. There's research on it. You've read it. But putting it into practice, there seems to be this big gap that folks can't necessarily jump. And I don't think it's any fault to anybody. I think it's just human nature. There's a lot of things that we know to be relatively true or helpful, or could be innovative and move us forward, and we just struggle to get it to scale, or struggle to get it into practice, or just thinking about the wasteland of good ideas that we just couldn't pull off. It's large. So the knowing doing gap is, how do we, this PLC Lite thing exists for a reason, because how do we get past just putting in these parts, like making a common formative assessment and asking every team to use it? That's we know that to be useful, so we're going to go do that. But how do we get it get that thing, common formative assessment, into a space where it is a self-sustaining assessment conversation, evidence-based conversation about student learning? That's to get to that doing part of it, like the using it continually to improve your teaching, is hard to do. I'm just using the common formative assessment as an example of the knowing doing gap, but there's many others we talk about in the book, grade book being another one, just aligning standards to your assessments in your grade book, saying, test one had these 3 standards on it. That's not getting you past that gap into making a grade book be a book that tells stories about growth and competence and preparedness. So this gap it's pernicious. It's there. It persists, and it's hard to cross. And I think that was something we were able to pull off here, the 4 of us, as the co-authors, our amazing teams and teachers and directors. That's, was a team effort to get us past this gap, which, I'm sure all the folks you have on that are leading something that you talk to, they know this gap really well. Like, oh, I have this idea, I'm going to go do it. And then it just doesn't happen, or it flitters away, or dies off. So That's what we took to be the knowing doing gap was we got to cross it. We can't just do PowerPoints about we need change and then just not do anything. Right. So.
Oh, so that's so right on the money what you're talking about. It's like, and you see it in all kinds of different, it exists in all kinds of different ways, but, lots of well-meaning thoughts and ideas that are kind of laid waste to down the sidewalk there as you move forward, depending on what happened and whether you understood exactly why we were trying to do the what or whatever. So I like that. It's just, so your book really gets into a lot of good stuff, and we're starting to get into it now. And what I want to make sure that I do is I've got to stress some of the really cool formatting that the book has. Beyond PLC Lite has these cool segments at the beginning of each chapter. One is called Short on Time with a question mark. And the other one, it says True North. If you are not sure where to begin, start here. Could you talk about these segments? I love these. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the short on time, I'll just be very transparent. I think writing is getting shorter, more condensed as the internet has grown and our capacity to, interrelate in those and transfer information in that digital space. So I think reading is changed in a lot of ways. Yes. I mean, I read long books, but it's like, I have to tell myself, I'm going to sit down and read a long text. Like it's just, there's a lot of people who are busy and reading, the things that are out there to read are shorter and condensed. And that's kind of where we put this short on time. Like, look, we've got this big book here. It's got a ton of stuff in it for you. But if you're short on time, just go to this, which we know you are, and we respect it. So that's why we put that there. And True North, we get, that was added probably about halfway through the writing process. Is we got to give our readers, but where do I start? You can read all this, you can highlight, you can bookmark, you can annotate, and then you can kind of lose yourself in all that. And if you're, a teacher who wants to try some of these actions out or move beyond PLC, or you're a school leader to go, what are some small things that I can do to create momentum? That True North piece was to give you a little shot in the arm to get you going. So yeah, those were important pieces. I'm glad you brought that up and saw that and find them valuable, because I hope the readers do.
Oh, I got to tell you, I don't see how they could not find them valuable, because it's one of those things that you go, as you start reading, you look and you go, wait a second. Okay, I think I'm going to go over here. Then you go over here. Then you go, but what did I miss? So you're going to take me back there. But also the idea that, if you're not sure where to begin, start here. It's I like that idea also, because, if I'm going to do this, how do I start? Because I'm not you, that type of thing. A lot of people are thinking about this or hearing about it. They're going, yeah, but I'm not Dr. Reibel. I don't know how to do this stuff, and you're like, nah, yeah. Look, start right here. Cool.
Oh, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the True North, as I led this work, the Short on Time and the True North, those were kind of a testimonial for me. Like, those were things I was saying to our teachers here when I was short on time, or when I had lost my way, or we had lost our way as a team. Like, no, let's go here. And I was meticulous about keeping notes during this whole process, because once we got into our first 20 teams, I knew something was going to happen. Like, I just had the sense that this was going to grow into a bigger initiative. Whether we succeeded ultimately in the end, I didn't know. But I'm like, I better keep notes in case it does, so we could help others if it does come to be useful. So like the True North list and the Short on Time stuff, those were all just notes that I took after a team meeting or after a day's work, just like, this is what I said, this might be helpful. And then it just found its, 10 years later, found its way into this book. And it should, I'm pretty confident it'll help people. I think they're nice little add-ons.
Oh, they definitely are. And I'm definitely positive that they will help people, because it'll give them, kind of give you that little jump start that sometimes you need when you're reading a book and you go, do I really need to read? Ooh, hey, they're telling me just start here, all right, or look at this part first, that type of thing. I like that, and I think that's good stuff for us as readers. So let's talk about something else, because I wanted to make sure I said that stuff because it's the next chapter. I'm getting ready to outline a couple of, not outline, but I'm getting ready to talk about a couple of my favorite chapters in the book. And I used to ask authors this question. I used to say, let's talk about your favorite chapters. And a lot of times they go, oh, well, do I have to pick a favorite? Because that's like choosing which child is my favorite. And so I figured out, all right, just cut that out and let me just choose my own. So that's what I've done here. And chapter 2 really goes along with those segments right here because of what you talked about. So chapter 2 is titled Focus, Taking Theory to Practice. And there's a section titled A Theory for Why Theory Often Doesn't Become Practice. And I love this. So let's chit-chat about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of theoretical frameworks out there for grading and instruction that, you can find plenty of them out there. Just Google search or talk to a colleague that's in research or university, you find them, right? But a lot of the theories that we knew to be good, good sound basis, research and practical ideas still weren't necessarily working for us, right? There were gradebook, separate behavior and academics and grades, and you'll see XYZ and, play out. And, or averaging isn't the most statistically appropriate measure of central tendency, use mode. And you see all these things, and it was like, all that stuff is there. Why aren't aren't we grabbing onto that? Why isn't that coming to be? People know this stuff to be worthwhile. And it wasn't until Everett Rogers' 1962 Diffusion of Innovation came into I don't even know how it got into my bookshelf or email, but it was his law of diffusion of innovation that has this idea of innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards as like groups of people who are engaged in a change, right? In a grading change or whatever change it is. He didn't say grading change, but any change, right? Any idea, innovation in an institution. So you have these groups of people, right? Your innovators are going to go, your early adopters are going to go, hey, innovators, they're doing cool stuff. I'm in too, right? But then, Steve, this is the critical point that we talk about in the book. He calls it the tipping point or the chasm, that there's this between the early adopters and the early majority, there typically exists this chasm that schools, institutions can't get past. And there's a funny diagram where in the chasm, there's these sharks and this violent water and all this, because a lot of people fall into it and then your innovation just doesn't go anywhere. So when we saw that theory, and this is why we named it the theory that, helped us get past all the other theories to get past that chasm, right? Was we had to pay attention to that tipping point, that chasm. Why was it that this early majority wasn't always going to take the bait? We could say mode is most appropriate to measure central tendency of student scores in the gradebook. That is statistically a proven fact, Steve. Like any stats book's going to tell you, use mode. But why weren't our teachers going, oh, yeah, duh, let's get rid of averaging? No one was doing that, right? They would just stay with averaging. So we had to, what was the relative advantage to doing a new grading system, or how did it compare to the values of the human beings living within our school here? Did we see value in it? Was it too complex? Some of these changes, that we were talking about with grading or instruction, were they too complex and people are just going to go, I can't do it. So Everett Rogers laid out this really clear, like, you got to get over the chasm, pay attention to that chasm. How do you coach your folks to and through to get past that? And we did a lot of work with that, Steve. Like, we paid attention to it. We listened. We talked to our team leaders, our core leaders within the professional learning community. What were their concerns? And through that listening and observing and collaborating, we were able to see very clearly what were some of the reasons why people were not jumping over that chasm. And once we uncovered those, once we got past that chasm, then it was off to the races. It was just exponentially more teams each year, and we were done. So, I'm not trying to reduce Dr. Rogers' work to just the chasm work. There's much more to it, but just in this conversation for the listeners, that's kind of generally his point. And we believe in it now because it got us to where we are today. So.
Very cool. And so I have to get you to do something for me and say, what year did that book come out?
1962.
I love it. Because as a historian.
That was the book I have was published in 1962. Maybe it was floating around before that, but
that's all right. It still makes my point, which is as a historian, and it's nice to hear that, because there's some in our world today that think that anything past, 3 years is just ancient history and can't be used. And it's like, that's cool. That's, I bow to you for bringing, making a difference there. That's cool.
Well, it's funny because I'll hear, the leaders I'll work with at different schools will say, oh, I'm just trying to get everyone on the same page, or I'll see them in a meeting. We got to get all on the same page. Well, really, it might not be that. It might be what's living within that chasm that is things you need to explore. And he lays out things that kind of live in the chasm in more detail. But, if I do leadership stuff with schools, I'll talk about that Everett's or Dr. Rogers' research and that chasm stuff. And that usually is like, oh, okay, let's go find out what's in it. Let's go. So
nice.
Anyway.
Love it. Throughout the book, and this is another thing that I make sure I mention, because throughout the book, you have excellent resources as well as e-resources that an educator could read the book and put to use now. Share why these were included.
The book roughly is set up as 10 actions to get you past PLC Lite, or if you want to connect it to the law of diffusion innovation research, to get past the chasm. So when I was leading this work, because I was boots on the ground, Dr. Twaddell, Mark Onischek, and Troy Gobble, they were, kind of leading this large school institution, and I was on the ground with the teachers. We couldn't have done this just by saying, like, for example, we're going to move to a skills-based curriculum. That is a really important piece to getting past, PLC Lite and achieving the goal, which I'd like to touch on at some point, which the goal of education in our mind is to create a self-reliant 35-year-old, right? Having a curriculum that's based on skill instead of content, that's a big deal, right? That's a big, big change for a lot of folks. When I was leading the work with our teachers, that you can't just say that, Steve, and go, all right, let's put skills out in front and put your content in the supporting role and let's go. We needed resources and protocols and reproducibles, that we found useful during this change, because a lot of the conversations were centered on a protocol or a figure that we needed to work through. And, so they were included because you can't just talk about the stuff. It's not just a conversation book. It's a how do you do it book. And that's why we, at the very baseline, we included those resources just so you could, have the, have the IKEA manual of how to do this, right? Like that's kind of, kind of what it was for.
I like that. I like that. But I think it serves a huge purpose, which is to, get people beyond the, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. I mean, not only are you given, hey, all right, fine, start here. All right. And then you're given stuff to make it, kind of like the little spray stuff that you can spray for those of you who use electric mowers. Sorry. But for those who use a little combustion engine, sometimes you have to spray the little stuff in the carburetor so it jump starts, and these resources work like that. So anyway, boy, did I show my age right there. Anyway, so chapter 9 is another one of my favorite chapters, and actions 7 and 8 are in here, and it's titled Implementing Evidence-Based Grading and Reporting and Restructuring the Gradebook. That's just a simple little chapter. It doesn't cause any angst or anything whatsoever with anybody in the classroom. I mean, let's talk about why this is so important, especially also knowing that you've written a book about some grading practices as well. So, hey.
Yeah, the grading, we have 2 other books on grading specifically because, again, that's kind of where this started, right? I'm going to go a little longer on this answer just because I think you set it up nicely. It's a small chapter, but it has big ripple effects through schools. Grading is one of the more intimate things we do. It's consequential. The grade book is visible to all stakeholders. It's how kids and parents understand how kids are doing. I mean, this is a big deal to make a grading change, and I get that. So I'll spend a little time on that. So Dr. Twaddell, he was here before I got here, a couple years before I got here, and his when he became superintendent, one of his things was, all right, whenever I leave here, I want to change a couple things. And one of those things was grading, right? I'm done with the traditional grading, done with the averaging points. Like, we know it's not good for kids. There's not really, I still haven't found a research study that says points and averaging points helps kids learning. It's just, if someone can show that to me or anybody, post it somewhere where I can find it, but I don't see any research that's saying that works. So it's just the only reason we do it is because it's what we've always done. Right. So anyway, so he wanted us, when I took my first role out of the classroom as an admin, as director of assessment, he was like, let's change this grading thing. You have some other duties to do for analytics and things like that, but I want 30% of your role to be about trying to make a grading change. Go research it, go check it out, go talk to other schools, just give it a shot, see what we got. So long story short, it was going to that 2011-12 school year, I was talking to 4 different team leaders at our back to school ice cream social. We just have like field house where we have ice cream cups and we meet and welcome back. It's a real fun community thing. And they're like, man, I wish, one of them's like, I wish we could go standards-based grading. And I'm like, new to my role, Steve. And I'm like, well, I've been tasked to try this out. Do you want to give it a shot? And by the end of that ice cream social, I had 4 teams who were ready to try it out. So I went to superintendent. I said, hey, I've got, Spanish 2, freshman English, theater, dance, and a FCS teacher, family consumer science teacher. It was food prep or something. And he's like, yeah, give it a shot. Just turn off points in the grade book for those courses. And we did some tweaking in our, we gave it a shot. And after that first year, Steve, those 4 teams had a far greater experience than not. So they told their friends. Cool. And that next school year, I had 23 teams knocking on my door saying, yeah, I want to do that. Right. Now, I set this up because then it just went from there. Right. And we did hit that chasm piece where we had to pay attention. There were some tough years in that 3rd or 4th year. Why are we doing this? Is it good for kids? and we had to look at our ACT, SAT score, that, we had to look at our AP scores, and none of that was going down. Our student survey voices, the student voices surveys were saying, yeah, we like this. Like, we can grow in this system. Our teachers were saying, I like it, but it's not quite where it needs to be yet, but I'm willing to keep making it better. So with all that, we just kept going. And we ended up with what we call evidence-based grading today. Now, we call it evidence-based grading because we wanted the name. We could have gone with standards-based grading, Steve, don't get me wrong. But standards-based grading to us still services the content discipline ultimately, meaning you've got to learn these standards so you know Algebra 1. You got to learn these standards so you know world literature, or world history. So the end goal with a lot of schools that I see go standards-based grading still is the content discipline. And it can't be. The end goal of education has to be building a self-reliant learner and person. And what I said to you in our earlier conversation is the goal of education, in my mind, is to build a self-reliant 35-year-old. Like, every parent, coach, director, teacher, advisor, put in any name, you want whoever you're mentoring to become a self-reliant, self-sustaining person, like in that context. And that is why we couldn't go to just tweaking some things in the grade book or just adopting wholesale the standards-based grading, framework. We wanted very clearly to our community, communicate very clearly to our community, to our students, to our teachers, to ourselves, that our model is mentorship. It is what a mentor does: sets expectations, collects evidence against those expectations to develop competence and skills so that ultimately that mentee can go out and fly on their own, like, period. So that's why we ended up with evidence-based grading, and, that's that short story. I'll pause there because I got some more things about the grade book, but is there anything you want to comment on or want me to hit on more? But that's that first part of that action 7 with the grading. That's kind of what that's about, is how to make your grading act more like mentoring, as opposed to calculations or anything else.
Oh, that's awesome. And knowing that one of your first groups that started it was theater dance, which a performance based content area that's so right up their alley, to see why you would do it that way, and then have them explain why they do it that way. I think it's great what you're talking about. So it's very, very much explains the thought, where you're going with it and so forth, which, going back to the 1950s, 60s, 62, whatever, Dr. Rogers, was it?
Yeah.
Said, that's grading is one of the, boy, talk about, you can get mixed up in all kinds of things that are supposedly the reason why you're doing it, and that water's churning, and there's definitely a lot of sharks and jellyfish and all kinds of things in there. So.
Yeah, what you're saying, there's a ton in that chasm. There's a ton of what's that you can get caught up in, but the why of what we do now with not only our grading, but everything, the opening chapter of the book is school is about building agency and efficacy in self and kids, and ultimately building the capacity of self-sustainment in our kids coming out of school, that they can live this self-perpetuating life toward their own goals. And that's not new, what I'm saying. That's not novel. But we feel, in our experience, schools don't have all the pieces aligned in the right way to deliberately produce that or meet that goal. They get caught in the what's or in the chasm, and, things pull them away. And our hope in this book is that we've given you the resources and the framework the start here's, the true norths, that you can start, some momentum toward that goal of building a self-reliant human being. So anyway, then just quickly, chapter 8 is about the grade book and how you report that evidence. Our grade book's structured around skills, and there's evidence in each of those skills. We have a growth story in there as well that informs our interventions and eligibility. We have a preparation story to comment on how well kids are preparing for their learning. Different than behavior. We're not talking about compliant behavior there. We're literally telling the story whether Steve or Tony has done the foundational work that's going to help them perform at a higher level on some of those formatives and summatives. So there's a lot more in that chapter on the grade book on, the stories that our grade books tell too. So.
Awesome stuff. And I got to tell you that this is where we tell the audience, and to find out more, you go get the book. All right. So. Yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to choose one more chapter that I just absolutely love. And that's chapter 11, which it's action 10, responding to students' learning stories. So tell us what students' learning stories are.
Yeah, this is, learning story is our term. And it's not a new term. A learning story is a general term that you can figure out what it means just by generally what it, it's inherent in its name. But, you hear like learning profile, you've heard, funds of knowledge, you've heard, holistic packets of student information. You hear like lots of different terms that way, but we like learning story because at any point during a kid's education, they're producing a story at a given moment, right? What I'm amazed at, Steve, still, and actually looking back, to be fully transparent, we were looking at this too before we started this journey, with intervention and support and acceleration, right? That area, responding to students' needs and learning. We were looking at our kids through two stories. They either could do the standard or content at a given moment, or they couldn't do the standard or content in a given moment. And that was because our grading was based on points, and our, essential standards focused just on the content discipline and all this, stuff that's in the book. But that's pretty narrow of a view of kids. You can't just say a kid can and a kid can't do the content. Like, kids are human beings. They're people. They have much more complexity than just this binary can't story. So we started going, well, gosh, there's a whole bunch of kids who didn't do their homework or didn't do the work. There's a whole bunch of kids who are avoiding school and not coming to school. There's a whole bunch of kids who think they could do it, but when they got their test back, suddenly realize that they can't, right? And we started to explore, like, wow, there's a lot more. There's a lot more stories that kids are presenting at any given moment. So in the book, we roughly talk about these stories: a can, can't, think I can but can't, think I can't but can, a didn't, and a won't. Those are kind of our learning stories. But the point is follow the kid's story, not their scores. Follow the kids' evidence of who they are in a given moment, not just their cutoff score on a test to decide on what intervention they get. I'm still shocked by how many schools give can't do kids, or sorry, they give won't do kids who are not showing up to school, apathetic about school, avoiding work. Their solution remains, hey, Steve, you haven't been at school for 5 days. Can you meet me in the library, and I gotta help you study for this test? That's not the right intervention at that moment for Steve. Steve is a school avoidant kid, a won't do at this moment kid. And I need to give Steve a won't do at this moment intervention. That's going to help him. right? So Steve's story is a won't do story right now, not a can't do story, right?
Right.
So that's, there's just, we can't just follow cutoff scores is the point of that chapter. We have to follow the story, and kids are presenting all different types of evidence and information that you can use to determine a better intervention based on their story at that moment. We just don't chase stories enough in our RTI student support stuff enough. It's there. I'm not saying we're the first ones to say this. It's just schools tend to just make a 47-minute RTI period. If you're not doing well on a standard, you go there to get help. Well, that might not be my story. My story might not be a can't do the standard story. It might be I didn't do my preparation because I had to work that week, and I got tired and just made a decision because of the opportunity cost didn't seem too high for me. So I just didn't do well that week. So we were trying to provide in this chapter, I'm glad you brought up this chapter because it is an important one. We just wanted to add a little bit of a nuance to the wealth of information that's out there about intervention. We're by no means an expert on, large scale intervention systems, but we just wanted to add this part in there. Pay attention to stories when you're building out your support acceleration intervention systems.
Oh, I love this chapter, and I love what you're talking about because it's so important, because I think that's part of what gets lost in the whole wash of everything, which is the students. Yeah, it's like, come on. So love it. Anthony, we're almost finished now. Before we go, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
Yeah, admittedly, I'm a lower social media profile. I just, with the busyness of my job here, and I don't keep a big digital footprint. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the place I'm most active. I do have an Instagram account, but I don't post it that much. So I would say LinkedIn, and probably the best way to come learn about this is just go to d125.org, which is our school's webpage, and there's a grading, teaching and learning tab there. I think it's called Grading at Stevenson High School, and that'll give you all this information about how we do assessment and grading. And then obviously my email's on there. You can always reach out there, but yeah, so pretty narrow. I wish I could do more. I just, I don't find the time to do it. So, but that's where you can find me.
Very cool. And I'll put that information in the show notes so they can reach out to you possibly. And this has been really cool. But before we go, I got one more question for you. And it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Yeah. I will do two here. One who I wouldn't thank, and I'll give a reason why. And it's the same reason. It's the other side of the coin for the person I would thank. I had a science teacher who I probably would go back and say, I wish you could have done things a little bit differently, because I was there. I was present. I was thinking. I was ready to learn. I was, getting the content. But the layout of their class was, I just had to follow those steps of how to do it. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, it was do these steps and you will know stoichiometry, and do these steps and you will know, how electrons go from one level to the next level. Just do this. And why I bring this up, no fault. They were a great person, and, I had a good relationship with them, but it was from a learning standpoint. They didn't really make a big difference in my life and help me become a self-reliant learner and thinker, because I had to follow the prescribed step by step. And what I relied on then was just mimicking what they told me, and I got my good grades, and then I moved on. Right. But the teacher who I would say made a difference in my life and why I would thank them for what they did was they gave me space for me to think, for me to use my thoughts. They leveraged my own thinking as a valuable learning tool more than their thinking. They got me to trust my thoughts. And it was an English teacher. It was, we were, just an amazing class where she got me to see my own words and thoughts as valuable. And I don't think a lot of teachers are still given the permission to do that. Right? Like, it's okay that you teach kids more with their thinking than yours. And when I say that to teachers, they get shocked. They're like, wait, what? Like, yeah, but I'm a teacher. I should be using. No, you teach kids better when you use their thinking and words to teach them with than yours. Yes, you got to work hard at that positionality to do that. So she was my junior English teacher, and it was a hard year. She, gave us a lot of challenging books to read and papers to write, and pushed us really hard. But ultimately, why I would thank her, I don't even know. Hopefully she's still alive. I could probably track her down, but I would thank her for saying, thank you for making me see my own thinking as a valuable learning tool. And the last comment I'll make is, if we're going to create self-reliant 35-year-olds through our education system, that has to be a requirement, that kids learn to rely on their own thinking to get themselves through school. But yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. And I think you've given me some motivation maybe to track her down and thank her. So I have a homework assignment coming out of this.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And that's a good thing right there. You go, I got to tell you, it's really rewarding. I always wish I had thought about this question when I had something that I could do about it, because mine is a English teacher from my senior year. And unfortunately she's gone on the great beyond, so instead I chose a college professor and I reached out to, and wrote me back, and that was cool. And actually said some things that told me that she didn't remember me, because it's like, you couldn't make that up. They wouldn't have written that in the yearbook or anything like that. And that's a cool thing. So appreciate you sharing. I hope you're able to reconnect with her. So that'd be cool. But Anthony, I can't thank you enough for talking with us and sharing beyond PLC Lite, evidence-based teaching and learning in a professional learning community at work. Excellent information, practical and useful. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity. Wish everybody well. Take care.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.